A feast. Any excuse to return to Morijapi would have sufficed, but none could have been better than that which Horin presented me. I had in the meanwhile arranged for his son's admission, so it happened that I often ran into him in the school's vicinity. Sir, Horan said one day, I have news from Morijapi. There is to be a big feast there. Kusum said you should come. I was astonished. A feast? What kind of feast? They have invited many people from Kolkata, writers, intellectuals, journalists. They want to tell them about the island and all they have achieved. This explained everything. Once again, I was impressed by the acumen of the settlers' leadership. Clearly, they had decided their best defense was to enlist the support of public opinion, and this was to be a step in that direction. Of course, I had to go. Horan said we would leave in the morning, and I told him I would be ready. When I got back home, Nilima took one look at me and said, What's the matter? Why have you got that look on your face? Why was it I'd never spoken to Nilima about Morijapi before? Perhaps in my heart I knew she would not share my enthusiasm. Perhaps I knew she would see my excitement about their project as a betrayal of her own efforts in Lucibari. In any event, these fears were soon confirmed. As I described as best as I could the drama of the settlers' arrival, I told her about the quest that had brought them from their banishment in central India to the edge of the tide country. I explained their plans, their program for building a new future for themselves, their determination to create a new land in which to live. To my surprise, I found she already knew about the settlers and their arrival. She had heard about it in Kolkata, from bureaucrats and politicians. The government, she said, saw these people as squatters and land grabbers. There was going to be trouble. They would not be allowed to remain. Nirmal, she said, I don't want you going there. It's not that I have anything against the settlers. I just don't want you to be in harm's way. I realized at that moment with a great sense of sadness that from now on my relationship with Morijapi would have to be conducted in secret. I had intended to tell her about the feast of the next day, but now said nothing. Knowing Nilima as I did, I was sure she would find a way to prevent me from going. Yet I would not have lied had she not pressed me. She saw me packing my jola and asked if I was planning to go somewhere. Yes, I have to leave tomorrow morning. I made up a story about visiting a school in Malakali. I knew she didn't believe me, for she looked at me closely and said, And who are you going with? Horen, I said. Oh, she said, Horen? And the inflection of her voice as she said this was enough to make me fear for the safety of my secret. Thus was sown the seed of our mistrust. But to the feast I went, and it proved to be one of the strangest days of my existence. It was as if, on the eve of my retirement, I had been presented with a glimpse of the life I might have led if I had stayed in Kolkata. The guests who had been brought from the city were exactly the people I would have known: journalists, photographers, well-known authors. There was the novelist Sunil Gangopadi and the journalist Jyotrimi Datta. Some of them I even recognized, for I had known them back in university. One of them, we used to call him Kokon in those days, had once been a friend as well as a comrade. I observed him from a distance, marveling at how well he looked, at the bright effulgence of his face and the raven black hue of his fair hair. Would this have been me had I stayed on, living the literary life? I became aware as never before of all my unacknowledged regrets. I hung back, following at a distance as the settlers' leaders led the guests on a tour of the island. There was much to show. Even in the short while I had been away, there had been many additions, many improvements. Salt pans had been created, tube wells had been planted, water had been dammed for the farming of fish, a bakery had started up, boat builders had set up workshops, a pottery had been founded as well as an ironsmith's shop. There were people making boats while others were fashioning nets and crab lines. Little marketplaces where all kinds of goods were being sold had sprung up, all this in the space of a few months. It was an astonishing spectacle, as though an entire civilization had sprouted suddenly in the mud. After all this came the feast, done in the old style and artfully arranged with banana leaves set out on the earth, and the guests seated in the shade of murmuring trees. Among those who were serving, I spotted Kusum, who showed me the massive dekis in which the food had been cooked. There were gigantic prawns, both Golda and Bagda, and a fantastic variety of fish. Tangra, ilish, parshe, putri, bataki, rui, chitol. I was amazed, knowing that many of the settlers went hungry. I couldn't understand how this show of plenty had been arranged. Where did all this come from? I said to Kusum. Everyone contributed what they could, she said. But there was not much to buy, only the rice. The rest came from the rivers. Since yesterday we've all been out with nets and lines, even the children. She pointed proudly to the parshe. Fokir caught 6 of those this morning. My admiration was boundless. What better way to win the hearts of these city people than by feeding them freshly caught fish? How well these settlers understood their guests. Kusum urged me to sit down and start eating, but I could not bring myself to sit with the guests. I was not of their number. No, Kusum, I said. It's better you feed those who can spread the word. This is precious food. It would be wasted on me. I hung back in the shade of the trees and away from time to time, Fokir or Kusum would bring me a few morsels wrapped in a banana leaf. It was soon evident that the occasion had served its purpose. The guests were undeniably impressed. Speeches were made, extolling the achievements of the settlers. It was universally agreed that the significance of Morijapi extended far beyond the island itself. Was it possible that in Morijapi had been planted the seeds of what might become, if not a Dalit nation, then at least a safe haven, a place of true freedom for the country's most oppressed? When the day was almost at an end, I went up to Kokon, the rider I had once known, and stood silently in his line of sight. He glanced at me without recognition and went on with his conversation. In a while, I tapped his elbow. AJ? Here, Kokon? He was annoyed at being addressed so formally by a stranger. And whom was I? My QB, he said. When I told him who I was, his mouth fell open and his tongue began to flap around inside it like a netted fish. You? He said at last. You? I said, yes, it's me. You haven't been heard from in so long? Everybody thought that I was dead. As you see, I'm not. On the brink of saying, it would have been better so, he cut himself short. But what have you been doing all these years? Where have you been? I felt then as if I had been called upon to justify the entirety of my existence, to account for the years I had spent in Lucy Bari. But what I had to say in answer was very modest. I've been doing schoolmastery in a place not far from here. And you're writing? I shrugged. What was there to say? It's a good thing I stopped, I said. My work would have been put to shame by yours. Writers, how they love flattery. He put his arm around my shoulder and led me off, indulgently lowering his voice as an elder brother might with a younger. So, Nirmal, tell me, how did you get mixed up with these settlers? I know a couple of them, I said. Now that I'm almost retired, I am thinking of doing some teaching here. Here? He said dubiously. But the problem is they may not be allowed to stay. They are already here. I said, how could they be evicted now? There would be bloodshed. He laughed. My friend, have you forgotten what we used to say in the old days? What? You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. He laughed in the cynical way of those having never believed in the ideals they once professed, imagined that no one else had done so either. I was tempted to tell him what I thought of him, but it struck me with great force that I had no business to be self-righteous about these matters. Nilima, she had achieved a great deal. What had I done? What was the work of my life? I tried to find an answer, but none would come to my mind. It is afternoon now, and Horan and Kusum have gone to see if they can find some fish. Fokir is sitting here with a crab line, what is called a don in the tide country, and as I watch him play with it, my heart spills over. There's so much to say, so much in my head, so much that will remain unsaid. Oh, those wasted years, that wasted time. I think of Rilke going for years without writing a word, and then in a matter of weeks producing the Duino elegies in a castle besieged by the sea. Even silence is preparation. As the minutes pass, it seems to me that I can see every object in the tide country with a blinding brightness and clarity. I want to say to Fokir, do you know that every don has 1,000 morsels of bait, tied gaps of 3 arms lengths each, that each line is thus equal to the length of 3,000 arms? How better can we praise the world but by doing what the poet would have us do, by speaking of potters and rope makers, by telling of some simple thing shaped for generation after generation until it lives in our hands and in our eyes and it's ours.